It's time for Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking of Speaking, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome to another edition of the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Today we're taking an interesting dive, shall we say, and it'll definitely be a deep one into storytelling with our guest, John Livesay, a.k.a. the Pitch Whisperer. I have to ask him about that. He's an incredible keynote speaker. His TEDx talk, Be the Lifeguard of Your Own Life, has over 1 million views and was featured on Larry King's show. He has an innate ability to motivate companies' sales teams to turn mundane case studies into compelling case stories so they win more new business. Who wouldn't want that? He has expanded his storytelling principles into sales practices across an array of industries and outlines this approach in his best-selling book, Better Selling Through Storytelling. It even rhymes. An online course, the Revenue Rockstar Mastery. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Carl. Great to be here.
It is so blessed to be talking to somebody who understands stories, not facts and figures, and those are important, but stories.
Yes. It's my passion.
Yeah, exactly. Before we dive into what we're going to talk about today, because it's really cool what we're talking about, spotlighting the real hero of the story. It's not about you. That's where I want to dive in today. But I want to find more about how did you become known as the Pitch Whisperer? Give us the lowdown on that.
Well, about 3 years ago, I was being interviewed by Anthem Insurance, and they were looking at a couple of other speakers besides myself and deciding which one they were going to pick to speak at their meeting. And the audience was a lot of nurses and MBAs, and they had said, they need to convince doctors to use our data and not the doctor's data about whether a patient should do X, Y, or Z. But they don't have any sales training and they don't want to be considered salespeople. I said, well, let's invite them to become storytellers. They said, that's good. Okay. And then I asked a question, which is what's going to happen after I give my talk if I'm the one you select? Right. They said, we're going to have an improvisation session. People from the audience will shout out objections and they're going to role play on stage being the doctors and Anthem people. And I said, what if I stayed after my keynote and would whisper in someone's ear if they got stuck? Because, improv is all about yes and. You keep going. And they go, ooh, we hadn't even thought of asking a speaker to do that. No one else has offered. We're going to pick you. And so it went really well. And people were saying, oh, gosh, I wish you could be in my ear when I'm out in the field. This is fantastic. And I told this little story to editor, journalist at Inc. magazine. And she said, wow, you're the Pitch Whisperer. And I went, oh, I love that. And so now I've trademarked it. If you Google the Pitch Whisperer, all my content shows up. And it intrigues people because they go, what's a horse whisperer, dog whisperer? I even know what the heck's a pitch whisperer. So there's a fun little story that goes with that.
I love it. And in my circle, I don't know how it happened, but every feline known to man, except for maybe the big ones, lions and tigers, they seem to gravitate to me. So I've become the cat whisperer. So I get what it feels like to be a whisperer, but the pitch whisperer just has an interesting ring to it. And definitely is one that, congratulations on being crowned, given that title. That's phenomenal. Let's talk about stories because there's a story behind why we want to talk about stories. And the concept I want to go on is the fact that the real hero of the story, it's not about you. If it's not about you, so I'm telling a story. Who is it about?
Well, if we zoom out a little bit and remember, first of all, why are we telling a story? Because we want to be memorable and magnetic. We don't want to be pushy. So people can remember stories much more than they can data or facts. Then we zoom out again and we say, in order for someone to remember my story and repeat it to other people on my behalf when I'm not there, they have to see themselves in the story. And that's the magic sauce. So if it's not about you as the sales rep, in fact, I tell people you're like Yoda in Star Wars, or you're like a Sherpa helping someone climb Mount Everest. The hero of the story is the client you helped. And you need different stories. You think of your brain like a jukebox or a playlist. And instead of a different song coming out, a different story comes out depending on who you're talking to. So if you want to convince a doctor to buy your equipment, you should have a story that talks about another doctor that they relate to and see themselves in that story. And I have an example if you'd like to hear.
Yeah, give me the example if you want. Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, give me the example.
Olympus, the camera company, has a medical division, and they hired me to speak to their team. And they said, we have this piece of equipment. It makes surgeries go 30% faster. We don't understand why doctors aren't just jumping all over this. So, well, that's a fact. And there's no story. And even the most complicated, sophisticated needs, we buy it emotionally and then back it up with logic. So I asked some questions, and now they tell this, what I call a case story instead of a fact.
Right.
Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was 6 months ago using our equipment, and he could go out to the patient's family in the waiting room an hour earlier than expected. And if you've ever waited for somebody you love to come out of surgery, every minute feels like an hour. The doctor comes out early, puts them out of their waiting misery, and says, good news, the scope shows they don't have cancer. They're going to be fine. And then the doctor turns to the rep and says, this is why I became a doctor, for moments like this. Now that rep tells that little story to another doctor at another hospital who sees himself in it and says, that's why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too. And the client said, oh gosh, it gives us chills. Not only are we not telling stories, it never occurred to us to make a patient's family a character in it.
Though I don't disagree. I want to challenge that a little bit because, and I'm coming from the space of having done speaker training and my teachings, my understanding of the testimonial or the client story, shall we say, is highlighting how I solved that client's problem. Firstly, what the client's problem was, how I solved their problem, where they're at now. But at the end of the day, I'm the hero. Shouldn't I be the hero in that place?
You can be the hero if you don't want to make the sale. If you want to make the sale and have someone, you can walk out going, aren't I fantastic? They're like, yeah, thanks, bye now. But if you tell a story of someone else that they see themselves in, they go, oh, that sounds just like me. This person you're describing, their pain points, their challenges. Are you in my head? This could be my brother or sister. And that's why you want to make that person the hero and not yourself. Again, you're the Sherpa, helping them. Their challenges are Mount Everest, and they can try to navigate that by themselves, or they can have you as their Sherpa. So you're in the story, but you're not the hero of the story.
So how often, though, in that storytelling experience, when you're working with people to help them really sharpen this, how often are they relaying client stories but putting themselves as the hero? Would you say it's quite often they do that?
Well, first of all, they usually don't even talk about other people, other clients, and they just talk about it in terms of facts and figures. Like I've worked with architecture, they're like, this project was this many square feet and blah, blah. We did, and then, so it's not even a story. So if we get them if the rare times that people are telling a story, then yes, they made themselves the hero. When they came to us, they were struggling with this, and thank God I showed up, right? And nobody wants that. They want to go, oh, the better you describe someone's problem, the more they think you have their solution. And the best way to do it is to show it in a story. And then they go, God, that sounds like what we're struggling with.
Okay. So what I was taught then about client stories is wrong. And it's not wrong. That's the Canadian story coming up, by the way. Yeah. It's not wrong, but it's not right. Let's put it that way.
It's just an old way of doing it. There's a better way to do it.
Yeah. You want to be talking about your client, the problem that you solved, but you don't want to bring it back to you as being the focal point being on you. You want it to still be on the client or the result that client is getting. And I'm assuming as we're doing this, there's some emotional language attached to it as well. You gave some very emotional language and you were relating that story about Olympus.
Yes. Well, the 4 parts of that story are the exposition. So in order to tell a good story, you have to paint a picture. Who, what, where, when, like a journalist.
Yeah.
So we know the doctor's name, we know how long ago, we know where it is. Now we're in the story. Then the second part is the problem. And again, if the stakes aren't high enough, nobody cares. And when I was crafting this story with them, it's like, okay, an hour faster. Well, the doctor could do more surgeries, make more money. The hospital could make more money. Even the patient is under anesthesia less, so that's better for them. But I went one level deeper. But what about the patient's family? They're the ones that would really have the biggest emotional impact. And that was the surprise, because it's usually one of the three: doctor, patient, or the hospital that you tell us. So when you go outside of the box and people go, oh, and then I pull you into the story by saying, if you've ever had to wait, and even if you haven't had to wait for someone you love to come out of surgery, you probably know somebody who has, or you can imagine how painful that would be. And so now we have the stakes high, the emotions high. And then there's the solution where the doctor comes out and says, good news, they're going to be fine. And then this fourth and most important part of the story is the resolution. What happens after the doctor tells that news? If the story just ended there, it wouldn't be nearly as strong. But instead, we're tapping into the doctor's why they became a doctor. And that's what really gets other doctors to wake up and remember their own why. And that's what makes them see themselves in that story and want to go on the journey with you. And most stories don't have a resolution. They just stop at the solution. Imagine if The Wizard of Oz ended when Dorothy got in the balloon and she went, the end, right? But no, she's at home going, there's no place like home, and you were there, and I'm so grateful. And that's why that story is a classic. So helping people craft those four parts, and we just heard an example of that in action, is what makes that story so compelling.
Now, John makes it sound easy, by the way. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, oh, I could do that. It's probably a little bit more challenging than you think, because you have to think of those four parts. I would go out on a limb and say you don't have the luxury of being able to tell this story in 20 minutes. You have to tell it succinctly, in some cases in 30 seconds or less, right?
Yeah, good point. I actually have a little checklist. Once I get people to understand the structure of a story, and then I say, okay, you need to practice this with your coworkers, your friends, your family. And there's 3 C's. Is it clear? Is it concise? And is it compelling? So if it's not clear and you confuse people with acronyms, boom, they are out. They go, I'm not going to tell you I'm confused. My ego won't let you know that, but I'm just going to say, no, thanks. And then is it concise? And this is what you and I talked about before the show. The need for someone to remember your story so they can repeat it and become your brand ambassador to other decision makers who maybe didn't hear you pitch. And if it's concise, they can remember it. If it's too long and rambles and doesn't have a point, they forget it. And then finally, compelling. Does it make people feel anything? Does it tug at the heartstrings to have that emotional connection that makes people say, oh, we got to do this?
So the 3 C's, run those by me again.
Clear, concise, and compelling. And literally ask people you're practicing it with, was that clear? Did I confuse you? Yeah. Could it be any more concise, or is it perfect? And did you feel anything after I told you that story?
And be honest. I think the biggest thing is when you are practicing that, so don't practice on your cat, because the cat will just go meow. Like, you really need to practice on a human that will give you feedback. And you might have to say, honestly, was that really clear? Because it didn't feel clear. And there's a feeling thing that if it doesn't feel clear to me, but it sounds clear to you, it still might need some tweaking here and there.
Exactly. And if you think of yourself like an athlete going for the Super Bowl, how much do they practice? Same thing with rehearsals for somebody going on Broadway. And yet a lot of salespeople go, I'm just going to wing it. I'll make up a story on the fly, right? You're like, good Lord, that never works.
I don't know how many times in networking settings I've, at least once that I can remember, but I know I've heard it more than once, people who will stand up and even as the presenters and say, yeah, I had a rough little night last night. The kids were thrown up all night and I have nothing prepared. So I'm just going to wing it. And I'm not a professional speaker anyways. So all these excuses, and you're already, before you even start, you've completely derailed your credibility, your talk, everything.
Well, it's not only a professional speaking situation, it's an actual presentation to win business. So when I work with teams, I say you need a really good opening and a really good closing. So what's the opening? And I'm telling you, 90% of people without any training will say, thanks for this opportunity. I'm excited to be here. And I say that is a cliche. Everyone says it and it's not memorable. And P.S., not about you. Nobody cares that you're excited.
Are you excited?
And then the horrible endings I've heard. Well, that's all we've got. Any questions?
My favorite was always, in summary, or just to recap, because I don't have anything else interesting to say. So in summary, or before I go, which to me was always, before I go was always an invitation to get up and go to the door, right? Just before I go, just one more thing before I go. Oh, he's done, folks. You know what? I've got to go to the bathroom, so I want to be first. I don't want to have to stand in line, right? But seriously, so when you give people the invitation to not listen to you anymore, they won't. So if you have something compelling to say it. Absolutely. I did want to ask this premise about the story, making it about, not making it about you.
Yeah.
Is this a concept that you would suggest people should seriously look at incorporating or making part of or completely replacing their, quote, elevator pitches?
Oh, so yes, I think the elevator pitch should be killed right here and now. Let's do it, Carl.
Okay.
It's dead.
Done.
It's boring. It's usually memorized and sounds robotic, and nobody remembers it. And that's, also you're lost in a sea of sameness again, right? I'm a lawyer. I'm a doctor. I'm an architect. I'm a consultant. I'm a speaker. I'm a this. I'm a that. Instead, I have a little format that is very easy to learn, that the whole goal of the elevator, you're not going to be shocked, story, I call it, instead of elevator pitch, is that people are intrigued enough to want to know more. It starts like this. You know how so many salespeople, especially those in tech and healthcare, struggle not to be seen as a commodity. And as if that's not bad enough, they get so burnt out when they pitch against competitors. They come in second place so many times. Well, I'm known as the pitch whisperer, and I teach them how to become stories tellers. And after that, they all become revenue rock stars because whoever tells the best story gets the sale. That's my little elevator story. Now, the first step of that is, how. It's a conversation phrase that we use. Oh, God, know how this winter just never seems like it's going to end, right? That's how we talk to each other.
Yeah.
We just started it like that. The second part is who you help. My case, salespeople in healthcare and tech, right?
Yeah.
And then the third step is what their problem is. And you'll notice I use the word struggle.
Yes.
And still, that's 3 steps, not talking about me at all. And I stack not just one, but 2 problems there. They struggle not to be seen as a commodity. And secondly, as if that's not bad enough, boom, they're burnt out from coming in second place after working so hard to pitch. Then the 4th step is me, pitch whisperer. We've talked about that earlier. That's intriguing. People go, what the heck is that? Again, the whole goal is to get them to say, that's interesting. What did you mean? What's a pitch whisperer? And then the 5th step is, after my talk, they become revenue rock stars. Oh, I like that phrase. What does that even mean? How do you measure that? I think it doesn't matter what they ask me. The goal is that they ask me something.
Right.
Now, if they don't need me, they at least can remember what I do enough to tell somebody else. Oh, there's this guy that's a pitch whisperer. He helps people tell stories to win business. If I just, that's a much more interesting way to do it. And once I can fix people's elevator pitches into stories, usually within 5 minutes. It's a lot of fun. And it's great.
I really like this concept because, again, I've had many, many, many different, concepts presented to me for, elevator pitches, which apparently we've already 86'd that term and went with, what do we call it? Elevator story?
Yeah.
Elevator story. Okay. But I really like how you've brought this and encapsulated it. And again, it sounds simple. Yeah. It probably isn't, but it's a heck of a lot better than, hi, my name is, I am and this week we're having a BOGO and you should sign up for this and don't forget to buy this. And here's my email, or
right.
Maybe even worse, call me.
The desperate. Yeah.
Yeah. So in weaving that story in, and again, you did it in probably 30 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably around 30 seconds. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is phenomenal. I'm learning so much about this. Here I thought I knew everything there was to know about stories. And then you come along, John.
Glad I can give some new tips.
Any challenges that in your experience that you're seeing that people keep making over and over again, be they business owners or sales experts, that they're making when they're getting into storytelling mode? Every time they seem to, it's a cycle that keeps happening?
A lot of people make the mistake of not realizing how important the team slide is, because most people have a team slide when they're presenting. If there's a team of people who, if you hire our firm, whether it's an architecture firm, law firm, whatever, tech firm, this is who you would be working with. They underestimate how important that is. They go, oh, we're going to cut that if we run out of time and just talk about the product. People buy from people they trust and like. And so the old myth of, in order to get someone to hire you or buy from you, they got to get know, like, and trust. We've heard that 100 times. Mm-hmm. I like to flip that script because that belief that people have to get to know me and my product and my company first causes the behavior of, let me send you one more email. Let me send you more data. So if we flip the script there and start with trust, so it's a gut thing. Is this a safe email to open? Did I get a warm intro from Carl? Am I making eye contact? Do I trust this person? So gut, then that goes to the heart. Do I like you? And the best way to up your likability is to show empathy. Are you describing my problem in a way that makes me think you have my solution? And then finally, the head. And that's still not the time to pitch more information. Here's the unspoken question everybody has when they hear you pitch anything. Will this work for me? They might trust and like you, but if they don't think it's going to work for them, they're not going to buy. And that's why storytelling is so wonderful. If you've told a story, the right story to the right person at the right time, and they see themselves in it, then boom, they're going to want to go on the journey with you and you've answered that question. So that's how that all works.
I love that. How often has this happened where you're working with somebody and they're getting there, they're starting to get the ideas, but you're listening to what they're sharing. They're either not telling the right story or they're not going deep enough. Does that happen often?
Yes. And I tell people it's okay. You don't have to be a perfectionist every time you're learning a new skill. It's a progress thing that we celebrate.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge is really getting clear on who you help and what problem you solve.
Yes.
Once we have that defined, then the story is wrapped around that.
And that client avatar, figuring out who that is, for some people, that's their biggest challenge. It's not that they're not good storytellers. It's just they don't know who they're talking to because they don't have that. I'm speaking to Jane, and Jane is 35 to 46-year-old woman, and she's in this profession. Here's what she's doing, and da 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 da. They don't have that image.
Let's assume you're in real estate, right? And you go, okay. So one of my avatars is a young married couple. This is their first home. Another avatar is a retired couple downscaling and selling their home, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's another avatar who got transferred and is moving to a new city and needs my help figure out what neighborhood to buy in, right? Each of those people need their own story. You can't tell the story to the young married couple that you tell to a senior couple downsizing their house. So that's why you go, who are the most common avatars I have? 3, 5 of them, whatever it is. And once you've got, that's why your brain is a playlist or a jukebox. And you go, okay,
right.
This is, and who's going to see themselves in this story again? Mm-hmm. I'm the Sherpa in all the stories. The hero in the story is, oh, you know what? I just sold a house to another young married couple. It was their first home. They were nervous, right? Oh, I just helped so-and-so, the Joneses. They've been in their house like 30 years. Can you imagine? It was very emotional for them to let that house go, but they didn't need that big house anymore. So then they're like, oh my God, you know us and you can help us. You help people who are just like us.
I love it. So what I'm hearing is you might have more than one avatar.
Oh, yes.
Which means when you're delivering, when you're speaking in this sense, when you're doing your client story, but then also when you're doing your elevator story. See, I've already ditched the word pitch. I ditched the pitch. See, it's because of you, John. I'm not pitching pitch anymore. I've pitched pitch
away.
It's
case studies into case stories, and I'll really be happy.
But these avatars that you're talking about, they're as applicable when you're working through, or when you're telling your
story. Yes.
Yeah. When you're telling your elevator story.
Now, there's where the challenge becomes for some people, because they go, oh, I serve so many different people, or I have so many different things. You'll notice as a sales keynote speaker, I picked 2 categories. You know how salespeople in healthcare and tech struggle with?
Yes.
I've spoken to many different audiences, mortgage companies, insurance companies, on and on and on. But I don't try to list all 10 types of audiences that have hired me. I picked my top 2. Mm-hmm. And ironically, when you niche down like that, it's easier for people to remember what your specialty is. And then I get requests from law firms and architecture firms going, we really want to hear what's going on in health and tech care. Can you come share, your experience working with that audience? We think it's relatable to what we do. So people think if I niche down, I'm going to lose opportunity, and the opposite is true.
That's interesting, because that's one of the challenges that people have is they want to be everything to everyone. They end up being nothing to most people if they don't niche down. But even as they start to niche down, they go, well, if I'm too niche, then I won't have those opportunities. And you're saying, at least in your experience, it's proven to be quite the opposite, because you have other industries saying, listen, I want to find out what's happening in this area, because this is what you're talking about all the time.
Exactly. Now, sometimes I'll have, I was up for a speaking gig at the executive recruiting world.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, have you spoken to anyone else in our industry? So sometimes they want to, and the same thing with healthcare. Now that I've spoken many times in healthcare and tech, I have many references in that. But this was my first executive search audience. And I said, well, I haven't. I have spoken to an architecture firm, which has a very similar business model to you. In other words, architects specialize in practice areas. This one does law firms. This one does airports. You have a team of salespeople. They specialize in finding CEOs for, nonprofits or law firms, et cetera, et cetera. And they get in a final three, just like you do, and have to present in that hour. And whoever tells the best story is the one that gets picked. And I said, I just helped a firm win $1 billion airport renovation. Would you like to hear that story? And so I answered the question, but then I gave the bridge between I don't have exact experience in your industry, but I have adjacent enough that I can still speak to your audience.
And you've just also utilized stories.
Yes.
To pitch.
Right. And he said, I see what you mean now about stories, because when we pitch against competitors, they call it a bake-off, a shootout. There's all kinds of words for it. We ask if we could go last, because we hope if we're last, that we're memorable. And I said to the CEO, well, hope really isn't a strategy. You can't control what order you go on. But what you can control is that if you're the one telling the story, that'll make you memorable, even if you're the first one.
Mm-hmm.
You're hired.
And then all of a sudden, the heavens opened, the choir was singing.
Yeah. It's just like when you're interviewing for a job or you're looking for a house, people go, oh, nobody ever buys the first house they see. Nobody ever hires the first person they interview. Not true. They do.
Yeah.
If you're the best storyteller.
If you're the person, yeah, for sure. Oh my goodness. John, I could talk to you all day. I can't. I'm going to run out of tape, as if I'm using tape. That's great. I'm going to, and I know you understand that reference. So there you go. John Livesay has been my guest today. Before I let you go, John, a couple of quick things. Number one, you have something that people can learn from. Yeah.
If you take out your phone and you're going to text the word pitch with a P. I got to really emphasize that P, Carl. PITCH to 66866. You get the first chapter of my book, The Sale is in the Tail, which is a business fable, a story about storytelling, sent to you for free.
Phenomenal. And we'll put that texting code, by the way, in the show notes, as well as John's information, his links, if you want to follow him on social media, or, tap into him, reach out to John for any other services. That'll all be in the show notes as well. John, it's been a great conversation. I'm glad that you've, debunked some storytelling, not myths, but, you've really, in the time that we've spent together, you've certainly changed my mind and how I should structure my elevator story.
Good job.
And my client's story. It's not about me.
Exactly.
Not even remotely about me. It's been a great conversation. Before I let you go, though, John, I'll give you the final thought.
Arthur Ashe, the famous tennis pro, has a great quote. The key to success is confidence. The key to confidence is preparation. So think of yourself like an athlete and don't wing it, and prepare your stories.
I love it. John Livesay, thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thank you, Carl.
And remember, get out there and own the platform and tell the right story. Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca. And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.